Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Monday mornings between 9 and 10 o'clock, we talk about things that impact you and your condo or homeowners association, some of the things that you may be concerned about or some of the things that you may be interested in. My name is Mark Brechbill. I'm a local CPA and a licensed community association manager, along with Peter Mullengarden. Peter's our attorney and is the person that answers all the questions. He's the one that knows all of the answers. He is a absolute genius, knows all of the answers to everything, and will give you just a straight answer every single time. How's that for pressure, Peter? So so today Peter's going to answer all of our questions on the coronavirus. So because he's an expert. So no, for those
I got my medical degree right here in crayon on the wall.
That's right. So but we're gonna get into some things this morning, and but we're here for you. So 220-9788, 220-WSTU is the number in the studio if you want to call. We don't need your association, but we do need a name to call you, and some discussion of what the issues are. We'll do the best we can. As we always say, we give you what we call a radio answer, which means we don't have your documents, so we can't give you a hard and fast answer. And if you need something like that, you need to call somebody like Peter and sit down with him and have him look through your documents and make sure that the general answer applies in your case and that your documents don't supersede that. But otherwise, it's pretty simple. We're here, you call, and we try to answer the question the best we can. So we're encouraging you to do that. We're going to have some information this morning for those of you that called in or are listening this morning. We will have some information on what you can do with potentially for funding, disaster recovery, things like that. We're going to talk about that a little bit too, in terms of what's out there and what's coming down the pike. But anyway, so we do have our first caller this morning. John, go ahead.
Yes. Hi. Good morning, Mark. I hope you guys are 6 feet away from each other.
We're 8. Peter's all over.
We're about 30 miles from each other. Right?
Yeah. Peter stays as far away from me as he can. So that.
Yeah, and under all circumstances.
Under all circumstances, right.
I just wanted to confirm, you said there's a lawyer that's going to give me a straight answer, correct, Mark?
Yep, that's what I said. I put the pressure on.
Let's try to find one before the show's over. And this is, I've never met Peter, but I've talked to you before. You sound like a wonderful guy, but every time I go to speak to a lawyer, I always leave with more questions than I had when I walked in, and I write them down before I walk in.
Yeah, that's right.
Can't bill for giving one answer.
That's right. You can't bill for giving one answer. That's right.
Anyway,
you bill by the hour, right, Peter?
Of course.
So.
My question to you is, of course, because of this virus, our annual meeting and election was canceled on the very day they had the Florida primaries. Now, the trouble I'm having, and of course, I'm going to look like a stick in the mud because I'm being insensitive. I'm like, this is an emergency. It's the end of the world, this virus. And it is bad. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not taking it lightly. But I had the virus of 2 years ago, and that was a bad one. And 80,000 Americans died in the 2017-2018 season. So anyway, to get to my point, they canceled it without 48 hours notice. They just canceled it the day before we were supposed to meet. And I'm wondering if that is still considered a violation. I don't believe the governor declared a state of emergency. Like I said, the Florida primary still went through. People were still going to the polls. What do you think?
Well, again, we're in pretty unprecedented waters, as everyone knows. At this stage, I don't know if the governor declared a state of emergency for the whole state or not. I know he was declaring a state of emergency, I saw it, for various areas. The Condominium Act does say that when there is an emergency declared, in order to deal with damage from that emergency, and you can debate what the term damage means, that one of the things that an association can do is to cancel meetings. There's another section that talks about you can restrict access to the property and things like that, and we'll probably talk about that before the show's over. At this stage, and I do realize that we've had lots of viruses. I guess you were unfortunately had H1N1, whatever that was 3 years ago. Quite frankly, I don't have an issue with canceling the meeting. Now you can debate as to whether that technically would be considered a violation by the division or not. I don't know. But I've been telling my clients, I will hang my hat on those emergency powers. I do think this is an emergency. I do think this virus has shown itself to be perhaps or most likely more deadly than the other ones, highly communicable. Pretty much the order's out there to social distance, stay away. Now, should the meeting be permanently canceled? No. Do I think they should reschedule and have it when things hopefully calm down in the hopefully not so near future? But I think one of the functions of a board is to protect the health and safety of its membership, of its owners, of its members. There is no playbook for this type of situation. There probably will be one afterwards because, unfortunately, our system is more reactive often than proactive. But, I'm not going to blame the legislature for not being omniscient and, foreseeing everything. So, long story short, although maybe could that be a technical violation? It could be. I'm more concerned about, I'll take my chances with the consequences of that as opposed to the consequences of people getting together when they probably should not have. Now, if there's a way to do the meeting remotely, which is difficult in terms of, having something set up where everyone can call in, whether it's using Zoom or something else. But long story short, I don't have a problem at this stage with a meeting being canceled. I understand that we had our primary. Ohio canceled theirs. Okay, so and I know we're not Ohio, but again, I'll err on the side of safety, even if you might think it's an overreaction, and take my chances later with those consequences as opposed to consequences of, unfortunately, maybe the virus going through the community. Condominiums are closely knit, and people live in close proximity to each other. So again, I'll take caution and prudence and rescheduling over having the meeting.
Well, I'm not so opposed to them canceling the meeting as the way they did it. And I had even asked them a week before. I says, "Are you guys still having the meeting? Because you need to think about this." And they had, the 2-week notice. They always mail out the second notice right at 14 days. They don't do it at 21 days or 18 days. They got to wait until the last minute. So I told them, I says, "Listen, you know what's going on out there. I mean, are you guys, well, we haven't decided yet." So they're all fumbling around, and it's not the fact that they canceled the meeting. They should have done it. If it was scheduled for Wednesday, they could have easily done it the day before on Monday. They could have gave the 40-hour notice, but they didn't. They waited until Tuesday. And to me, it's
I agree that perhaps, they shouldn't have, done it at the 11th and a half hour. Okay. And again, this is, I don't want to sound like one of these newscasters, but this is a pretty fluid situation with, it seems that the closings and the edicts, whether it's national government or state or whatever, it seems to be changing every press conference. But yeah, was that the best choice to wait? I don't know, maybe not. But in the end, they made the decision, I think, I guess in their minds was in the best interest of the community. Again, hopefully they're not going to just be canceling it permanently. That it's more like postponed than canceled. I think they should still have their annual meeting. Okay.
So Peter, my main question is, what do they do with the ballots? Is what I'm getting at.
I think they just hold them. They need to hold all the ballots. Okay.
Well, if the meeting, let me ask you something. If the meeting was canceled, why would those ballots still be valid? Because we never had a meeting to begin with. You have to have an annual meeting for you to hold it for 90 days.
If it's again, Warren, I don't have all the answers to this one, even though that's what Mark opens the show with. I think in this situation, if they quote canceled unquote rather than postponed, if they want to, I guess, and I'm guessing here, that I probably would have postponed rather than flat out canceled. Okay. So should they do another 14-day notice in June, July, May, whenever things are somewhat back to normal, whatever that is, and then send out another ballot? You know what? I'd probably be okay with that. If it was a quote cancellation unquote, and they're not just a postponement. I still think they need to have their meeting. Whether they couch it in terms of redoing it or redoing the second notice anyway. I don't think you have to go all the way back to the first notice. Or they're going to treat it like a postponement, hold on to the ballots, and then just do a 14-day notice of when the meeting's going to be actually convened. I'm not sure there's a tremendous difference there. If they throw all the ballots away, obviously they have to renotice. Now, look, how is the state going to treat all this in the event we have other associations like yours that are in similar situations where meetings were canceled, and they don't know what to do with it. I don't know. In your situation, perhaps they should do a second 14-day notice and send out ballots again. I would have couched it if I was them in terms of a postponement rather than a cancellation. Or maybe they used the word cancellation and they meant postponement. I don't know what they meant.
Well, let me clarify. They put cancel / postpone, which is bad wording. And they never mentioned
they hedged their bets and did both.
An emergency.
I would treat yours. I hope they treat it like a postponement, and then when things again are hopefully back to normal, that they do a notice of the actual holding of the meeting. They still have the ballot somewhere, hopefully locked up. And then they just hold their meeting when they can.
Yeah, I just don't see them reconvening and within 90 days. And usually,
I don't. Well, as far as proxies, you mean, or something like that, or what?
Well, the proxies. Yes, there's proxies because of the annual meeting is involved.
Yeah, but John, what's going on at your meeting other than the election? Are you voting on something else?
We always have our annual meeting during the election night. Same time. Now,
usually
on something else depends on whether we convene, have a quorum for an annual meeting.
Well, the election is always in conjunction with your annual meeting, right? By law.
Yes. Yes.
But the 90 days usually is only germane or pertinent if you're having issues voted on other than an election, like a waiver of reserves or
ballots aren't subject to that. You're saying?
Yeah, because the 90 days apply to the proxies. I'm not too concerned, quite frankly. You're talking about a limited proxy.
Just to be clear, you're talking about a limited proxy where you have a question of amending something in your docs. Okay, I understand that part. I always thought though that ballots fell under also that time frame, but I'm wrong. Assuming there's
nothing in the law about that. There's nothing in the law about ballots because again, it was never really considered. Because you don't need a quorum, okay, to have an election, because 20% of the people voting is a quorum.
Well, you know how it is. Ballots, you got to keep the election material for 1 year. So I guess if there's a time frame, a ballot is good for a year.
Well, I don't know if it's good for a year, but yes, you have to keep it for a year. But there's nothing in the law about like a proxy expires after 90 days. There's nothing in the statute about a ballot expiring after 90 days. Don't know how they would treat that, but the law doesn't address that.
Okay.
And just as a side note, for those people who are maybe have this situation coming up, because John's already gone through this, but if you've got this kind of situation coming up, you can adjourn the meeting. If you've got other issues that have got to be dealt with, you can, as Peter said, you can still handle the election. So you don't need a quorum. So if the big issue is the election, and you don't want people to congregate, then certainly you could still have, you could still determine who was elected and postpone or adjourn any other
action. Well, here's one idea. Here's one idea, and we've had some associations do this. Okay, where they have the election, they do it remotely in the sense of, because, under the law, everyone is entitled to view the committee, the election committee,
Right.
checking in the ballots and counting the ballots. Now, if no one's in the room, obviously, so some associations, and I don't know if this is going to fly or not with the state, but I think it would. Some associations have done it where they've set up a video feed, and they've basically done this with their committee seated apart, I guess, for social distancing, and they've done the counting part. Even though there's the election part of the meeting, they've done it remotely with it being videoed. And now again, is that going to fly? Because not everyone has the capability of watching that because they don't have the computers or this or the other thing. I don't know, but I know some associations have done it that way. I can't swear on a stack of Bibles that that's going to withhold challenge either, but I know it's been done. It's an idea. Again, people are trying to come up with innovative or novel ways to do their meetings, both to get their business done and to obviously comply with the requirements that we don't get near each other for a while.
Well, and the other thing is that going forward, everybody's talking about how this potentially is going to have an impact on not only our businesses now, but how we do business. And this is a good example. I think this is going to push more associations to electronic ballots. We have the right to vote electronically now. The systems haven't been well received because they've been limited, the ones that have been approved. But I think going forward, I think we'll probably see more effort to do electronic ballots because even just for convenience purposes, it's not always the easiest to get, to a meeting depending upon the time. Like John said, they handle theirs the election night, which is good, except that, like for me, I probably wouldn't be able to make the meeting because I'm normally working the election and we're not done until, late at night sometimes. So, so I think this is going to make a difference. I think people are going to look and rethink some of these things. I think there's the potential that that people will rethink, like you're talking about, Peter, the whole concept of video. I know one of the meetings I was at recently, they actually have a pretty elaborate video process where it's live streaming, and they actually don't have enough room in one room for everybody if everybody comes, so you can actually sit in another room and see all of the proceedings and what's going on.
Wow,
and
what community is that?
Do what?
What community is that? I can't imagine. We're lucky if we have 3 or 6 people show up at a board meeting.
Actually, I don't think it's Harbor Ridge. I was impressed by the way they did it. They had they had a big meeting, and they had it all set up. They had multiple video cameras, and they could actually people in the audience could have questions. And I think it wouldn't take much to have a situation where, like you said, Peter, even though some people don't have computers, most people got phones. So if they can call in, they can at least listen to what's going on, and be able to ask questions. So I think that, and of course, more and more communities have their own, if they've got cable services, they've got their own.
They have closed circuit. Yeah,
they
have
have
their own
closed
channel or
circuit.
something.
So I think we'll probably see more of that. I mean, it's getting to the point that a lot of the younger people, 50 and under, are pretty electronically savvy at this point, and would probably prefer not having to get home early or do whatever. If they can watch what's going on at another, or vote electronically. I know, just in talk, John was talking about the general election or the election that took place in the state for the primaries, and I will tell you, I suspect if this was now, that we wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have it.
We would have canceled it.
Because frankly, most of the poll workers are elderly. I mean, they're all, they're all in their 60s and over, 70s, 80s. We got one person in our club that helps out. Our Kiwanis Club volunteers, and the money that would normally be paid to us as poll workers goes to our club as a contribution. It's a way we can make some money for our club. Vicki Davis came up with that idea. But what we've got one person who's 90, that has always worked the polls with us. So I think that they would probably rethink all of that. And they had a number of people. Martin County was fortunate; they were able to get enough alternates, but a couple of the counties ended up short. And if they'd have had a turnout, I think the only thing that saved them is half the people didn't go, which meant that people didn't get to vote. So my point, though, was I have voted by mail and electronically, early voting or by mail for years now because I can't, I can't be there. I'm not at my precinct for the election itself because I'm usually working. So I think that we're going to change some of those kind of things. And, I would just say relative to your comment, Peter, my experience with the state, as you know, I deal with them from time to time on a one-on-one basis. And, they're not going to generally on situations like this. They allow a lot of latitude unless they think it's an abuse. So, for example, in your situation, John, if they canceled the meeting and did that because they were worried about people, they're going to get some slack. I don't think anybody's going to do anything to them. But
Mark,
but
I'm definitely not going to be calling the compliance department. I've dealt with them for 20 years, and it's been on a sliding scale downward as far as what's serious and what isn't serious. And I'm not saying this is serious.
No. But I'm just making a comment generally, in that I think if for example, an association cancels their meeting and that included their election, and don't reschedule it so that they can keep some board members in office that they thought they knew they were gonna lose, I think the state will come down hard on them for that. So I think a lot of it is probably going to be a facts and circumstance. If it was just truly an emergency and they did the best they could and then they postpone it, and I'm not talking about your case, John, specifically, I'm just talking about everybody, and then they postponed the meeting and maybe they went past 90 days or whatever, but they did the best they could and they tried to honor everybody. And, if then I think that the state will work with them and not have as much of a problem.
No, they do. Yeah, because the state does, I'm sorry to interrupt, the state does tend to bend in an emergency situation, like back during the hurricanes of 04, 05, not many, but some associations, broke the law, broke the rules with regard to reserves.
Right.
Because they were in a bad situation and they dipped into one reserve account, without getting a vote because they didn't have time for it, to use for other expenses. And from what I understand, back then the state, was not strict on the enforcement of, having to get that vote ahead of time.
But I think in
that emergency situation.
But I think, Peter, that's a good example, because those associations that took action well after the hurricane, within the next 60 or 90 days under their emergency powers, just to do stuff they couldn't get the vote to do, they came down on those. In other words, they didn't have a problem when people used their reserves without a vote because it was an emergency situation and it was legitimate. But there were some associations during that period of time that there were two main problems. They took money out to do improvements that were, material alterations to the common property that they couldn't get the vote for.
Well, that's different.
Yeah,
okay. You can't abuse it.
No,
okay.
and then the other thing that they ended up doing is, of course, we had some fraud that occurred, and there were some things that were spent inappropriately that the state came down real hard on those people. They actually did some jail time. But
yeah, I'm talking about legitimate.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm talking about legitimate need for the money right away. And, and they dipped into the roof reserve. I'm not saying you should do this. I'm not advocating this per se, but I know at the time the state would backed off on, enforcement against those associations.
Now, one of the things I would say for our listeners is that you need to be careful, though, because what's happened between 2004, 2005, and now is that anything that's covered by a penalty, those penalties have gotten stricter. And the state has eliminated the department's ability to waive on some of these things.
You can mitigate the circumstance, but the penalties range from $10 to $30 per unit per violation to a max of $5,000 per violation.
Yeah.
And if there's mitigating circumstances, you can get them to go down to the minimum. But you're right; they've gotten much stricter with the fining. Again, we'll see what the fallout after all this happens, regarding,
Peter,
these meetings and things.
Peter?
Yes.
You mentioned that they're getting stricter with the fining. We still don't even have our website up, and I think that law was passed a year ago, January.
Yeah, it became effective January 1st, 2019, correct. They will fine you for that.
And when you say fine, is there a certain criteria? Did you just mention what the criteria is by unit, number of units?
Yeah, the fine, depending on how severe the state feels the violation was, the range of the fine is $10 to $30 per unit, okay, with a max of $5,000. So,
okay.
If you have a large association, 400 units, 500 units, whatever, even if you're at the, or let's say 1,000 units, okay. Yeah, so even if you're at the end of the scale of $10, you'll be over 5,000. So they'll only fine 5,000. But so it's $10 to $30 per unit with a max of $5,000.
And Mark, do you have many condominium units associations where they have the electronic voting, and do you need a separate portal, or can you use the condominium website?
Well,
and create a portal.
No, you've got, and that's what I was getting at. I don't.
Johnny, your provider does it. Whoever you're going with.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's what I was going to get at. Is that I don't have many because, frankly,
I have 2.
Yeah. See, frankly, it's because you have to use specific providers that have been approved by the state, basically. And so there's only a couple of them out there, I think, and they're not widely. I think they're not. I've kind of gotten that they're not easy to use or that they're expensive, but people are staying away from them just because, there's not many choices. You can't.
Well, the 2, and again, I'm interrupting again, but and I don't know which ones they're using per se by name, but I know the 2, I only have 2 that I know of there. I could have more that are doing it. They just haven't told me, but I know I have 2 associations that are doing it. They have both found it very successful. They like it. Now every owner has the ability to opt in or opt out, so it's not like everyone has to participate. But every time that there's a vote, you send out a notice, and each owner opts in or opts out of doing electronic voting. And so if they want, they can still vote, the old-fashioned way. And everything flows through the provider. All this stuff goes out to them and back, instantaneously, over the, cyberspace. From what I've heard, it works very well. Now, again, it's a very small sample, obviously.
And it generally only works it's only for condos, right? I mean, because you've got HOAs.
HOAs have electronic voting too.
Yeah, but they have documents. A lot of times their documents would kind of make some of that impossible, right? If you can nominate from the floor or whatever, it doesn't kind of.
Oh yeah, it depends upon how the vote. Yeah, it depends upon how your voting is. Correct. I mean, obviously, if you have nominated, so. Yes, they can have it, but there are many HOAs that have condo-style elections in their bylaws.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, obviously, it's not one size fits all. No.
Right, and that's kind of why it's probably hasn't been as widespread. Is that a lot of the HOAs, they're less formal and more fluid, and so the condos have always had a really good election process, and so it makes it a little easier.
But I think you're right. I mean, even if we hadn't had this pandemic and what's going on now, which may spur more electronic voting, it was coming anyway. I mean, It may have been coming slower, but just like anything else, I mean, as time marches on, everything is becoming more electronic, more digital. So I think you're just going to see more of it, period. As the older generation goes on, like me,
as they get the coronavirus and die off. Oh no,
something like that. Don't be like that. And the younger ones come on, and they're used to doing everything electronically, whether it's shopping or anything else, right? I mean, so I think it's just a natural evolution. There's no stopping the fact that is the wave of the future. Whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, but it's definitely going to be. The wave.
And I think I do think we're going to have a lot of that's. If you look at it down the road, this whole process of meetings, especially in Florida where we got people to go up north and all that, then how many associations stop having meetings all summer long because it's like, well, I'm not there, so it doesn't make any difference anymore. But it does, and so a lot of stuff happens, and people don't always get a lot of information. And really, when you start looking at it, you got kind of a one-time expense. But once you get this stuff set up, the ability to use Zoom or Microsoft Meetings or something like that to conduct one of these things, you can do it, with video or without video on the members side. But you can see everything, you can hear everything, and it's a pretty straightforward process. So I think I think there's going to be a lot of distributed work that's going to happen as a result of this. And it plays right into the hands. You look at the younger people, their social activity is largely via phone and text, and it's not
right.
It's not even calling people. And so I think that this is going to move everybody a little more quickly to that kind of process. We have associations that ask all the time, they want to have money they want to pay their money, online. They don't want to send it. They don't want bills sent to them. They want to get stuff online, or by email or directly, associations, are the software that we've got for associations is, it's all online. You go out and, as a property manager, you go out on site, you see a violation, you issue there's a letter that you automatically send. It sends it out to them by email, tells them what the violation is and, what they need to do to fix it. And that stuff's all, and then a property manager can actually be a property manager, and all of their payments are electronic. You don't have to use a specific bank. It all goes in. So that kind of thing is it's faster, and it's becoming more prevalent, faster, and people want it. Once you get that kind of thing, then you don't want the old days where, you got to call somebody or you got to go back and have a secretary send a letter out and all that kind of stuff, So it's going to be, I think it's going to create some more efficiency, but we'll see what's happening. I think, we're still away from completely, but I think we'll get there. But I did want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on for associations to be aware of from a disaster standpoint. And we've talked a little bit about that, but but I want to mention that associations have in the past, during emergencies, they're considered businesses that are eligible for some of these SBA loans.
Yeah, small business. Yeah,
right.
Because I know several of mine got them post-hurricane scenario.
Right, and so, and that was kind of it was a lower level, different thing. But you need to be aware that there's a couple programs that are out there that they're talking about using. Nothing has been finalized yet. Well, one of them has been finalized, but right now, the administration is saying there's going to be $4 trillion provided in loans. All right. Now, you have to understand how this works. In general, an SBA loan normally is not made by the SBA. Sounds funny, but that's the case. It's made by a bank and insured or guaranteed by the SBA, right? So the person has to follow the bank's lending requirements. If the bank doesn't loan to that kind of business, then they can't do an SBA loan to that kind of business. It has to be, in general, the bank has to be willing to make the loan themselves. And then the only way they get the SBA guarantee is if they ask for it on a loan that they would have made themselves. The idea behind that was to free up money that they could, continue to use. So anyway, so this is going to be a little different. And disaster loans are a little different. Disaster loans, there's the FEMA loans. They were the $25,000 ones. But there's SBA disaster relief loans. They're up to $2 million. They're fixed rate at 3.75 for 30 years. So they are absolutely cheap money. And they're designed for working capital, though. They're not designed for reserves or construction. They're designed for working capital. But, if you've got an operation, you've got some people, you've got some costs that have got to be covered on the association. You've got some expenses. You got some salaries and all of those kind of things. This type of loan will allow you to cover that. It's basically 6 months worth of gross profit. Well, for a condo association or an HOA, gross profit is gross income. So, in effect, you got 6 months worth of income potentially. There's threshold levels that require more or less documentation, but these things are going to be out there. They're not done through the banks necessarily, although you might have some banks that'll help you with it, but they don't do them. They don't make them. So there's no, they're not involved in them directly. And, technically they've got to go online, and that's going to be a little bit of an issue, but because the system's not geared up to handle this many applications all at one time. Typically disasters aren't all over the United States simultaneously. They're, they're floods or tornadoes or hurricanes.
Certain regions or places.
Certain regions, yeah. So this is going to definitely tax the system, and there's no way to get the system up fast enough to handle everybody. So the system itself potentially is going to crash, but this system is out there now. That's one system, and up to $500,000, the process will be pretty easy. $500,000 to $1 million, there'll be a little bit more requirements. $1 million to $2 million, it has to go to Washington. Technically, it's not supposed to go over $2 million, but if you're considered a major employer, for example, around here, the hospital or the school system or whatever, if they were eligible, they would be able to go up to maybe $2.5 million. So again, that's one avenue for associations to look at. The second one is going to come through banks. This hasn't been finalized yet because, the Senate's still working on the package, but in terms of what's going to be out there. But the administration wants to get money out into hands as quickly as possible, and the easiest way to do that is to go directly from the banks. Don't go through the government. Don't have checks issued by the Treasury, but actually get that money out there directly through the banks. So what they're talking about, and I've heard loans up to 100,000. So I don't know if it'll be more or less, or if there's going to be different criteria. But basically, what will happen is if you borrow money under this program and you continue to pay your employees, you don't lay off your employees, you continue to pay your employees, that loan will become a grant and it will be forgiven. You won't have to pay it back. So there again, that's one that you need to keep top of, because it's going to be money to actually help you cover your operations, and you won't have to pay it back. It's designed to cover salaries and rent in the case of a business that's, renting their facilities. Not designed necessarily to cover mortgage payments and those kind of things, but it is designed to cover operating expenses potentially, but it definitely will cover salaries and benefits and that kind of thing. Is what it's there for. And if you don't lay off and you use it for that purpose, you won't have to pay it back, is what is being proposed at this point. There also is a Social Security tax holiday. So what's going to happen is for some period of time, they're talking 90 days, any payroll that you run, the employee will not have to have Social Security withheld, and the employer will not have to pay Social Security. So that means the net pay, it'll take less to pay that person because you won't have to pay the Social Security taxes. That's going to happen for about 90 days. The other thing that's taken place is that tax returns now are not automatically extended. They're just not due yet. So what's happened is the government originally came out and extended the time to pay your taxes until July 15th. Through some encouragement by the FICPA and the AICPA, we got the government to realize that still means that you'd be open to late payment penalties and all kinds of issues. So what's happened is the administration has, for this year only, has changed the due date on your tax returns from April 15th to July 15th. So, and it appears that all pass-through entities, partnerships, and S-corps will automatically be extended. So what that means is that you don't have to file an extension, you don't have to pay your tax, there won't be any penalties or interest. You now have until July 15th to file your return. So for associations who would typically do April 15th, that's kind of a big deal. You can wait. Associations typically don't have a refund, and a lot of times they don't have to pay if you do things right, but they could. So you've got a little bit more time now to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to handle your tax return for the year. And so So that's something that you just need to be aware of, that's been extended. And then I guess the last thing I think is that there are some there are some state loans out there that are $25,000. Those are similar to the old disaster loans. Those, as far as I know, have to be paid back within a year, and they're not going to be so. So you need to prioritize. I would be looking at these loans that you don't have to pay back first. Then I'd be looking at these SBA disaster loans, and it may be that you won't have to pay a portion of your SBA disaster loan back. So it may be that you don't have to go two separate places. But right now, I've heard two separate places: one through the banks that the banks would make, one through the SBA that the SBA would make. All of these things, if they're under $500,000, are designed to get out there pretty quickly and to get into your hands right away. So be aware of that. If you've got if you need assistance with that, you can call me at my office, which is 772-220-3380. Hit 0 and Elaine will answer the phone. Or you can contact me directly, 772-631-4800, and that's my cell. So you can contact me on that. When things like this happen, sometimes that fills up pretty quick, but still, you can do that or text me, because it's important to get in line. I'm bringing in and Peter, I'll mention this in case you're interested. I am actually bringing in a guy that this is what he did for a living for most of his life, was these SBA disaster loans. So he has quite a bit of knowledge, quite a bit of experience. He will work on a consulting basis with clients, particularly on the larger loans, to help them get them through the process. And we're going to set up some sort of a meeting process, and he's going to be available for people to join the meeting and listen to what he's got to say, and then get information from him if they want to contact him directly, or some of the smaller loans will probably go through me, and I'll work with the clients on those. I'm also, like I say, trying to get that same type of process set up with a couple of local bankers, one from TD Bank, one from Center States, and one from Seacoast, to try to see if they want to provide some information. So I haven't finalized that yet. I'm hoping to do that in the next 2 days, by Wednesday at the latest, because it's going to be important to get this process started. So anyway, I wanted to mention that about the financial side of it, because everybody's going to be impacted by it. There's going to be the financial devastation of this thing is going to be much greater than the devastation from the virus itself, I believe. And I think, it's going to be, we are close to a collapse of the economy, and, we're going to be pumping a whole lot of money into the system, but a lot of that money may have to be paid back. So, the ability to stretch out those payment terms over a longer period of time is going to be a big deal. And not using your cash is going to be a big deal. So anyway, I'll mention that so people can look at that. Peter, what about, we talked with John a little bit about disaster stuff. What about some of the things in terms of other disaster type procedures, or just general things that you're advising clients to do to avoid lawsuits, because there's the potential for that. And I would say, as associations, you need to kind of be aware of what the governor is shutting down, so that you stay consistent with that. Because if the governor's shutting it down and you're leaving stuff open, you're probably going to be open to some sort of potential lawsuit. So if you got a clubhouse and you're allowing groups of 50 or 100 to get together still, you may have a problem, I think. What about you, Peter? What are you?
Yeah, I think at this point, last week, I'm not sure what's going to happen this week. Last week, there were several inquiries regarding just that. What authority does the association have to shut down various aspects of the community with respect to whether it's the clubhouse, the fitness center, the pool, any other areas, as far as canceling board meetings, membership meetings, annual meetings, visitors or guests coming into the building or the property, or delivery people or contractors. I mean, all this is being rethought. Again, we're in, as I said before, this is all very new, very uncharted.
Peter, let me make a it's the only political statement I'd say is if you're in a gated community, please don't shut it off completely. Because part of the thing economically is to keep people who can work working. So if you're going to have people who can be working outdoors and aren't going to be affecting anybody, they're working on somebody's house, putting in screens or doing whatever, those people could still work unless you ban them from the community. And then that just shuts off all of that. So I know a lot of our communities are very community oriented and they care about people in the community. So think about that. It may be that you're thinking that, okay, we're just going to block all this out because this virus is we're going to take maximum precautions. But think about some of these things and the effect that it has on others in the community, because some of those businesses are going to go out of business as a result of that. And, when you need the help, you're not going to be able to get it. So I would just encourage you to think about complete closures. The shelter in place concept within your community, kind of give some thought to that, because economically it's devastating for all of the individual people, the day-to-day people that don't make a ton of money, that come in and spray for bugs or do some construction or whatever the situation is. They can do all of that without most cases without having any impact on the community. But anyway, so sorry, Peter, go ahead.
That's right. I mean, so what a lot of associations are trying to rely on now is just emergency powers, and it's both in the Condominium Act and in the HOA Act, although it's worded slightly different in each one because they're different types of communities. In the Condominium Act, it's Section 718.1265, which provides that to the extent allowed by law, and unless specifically prohibited by the declaration, articles, or bylaws, the board, in response to damage caused by an event for which a state of emergency is declared pursuant to another statute, the board can do the following powers. And again, this was done, several years back, dealing with mostly with hurricanes, and the damage then presumably was physical damage. But I think, most people who do what I do think that word can apply to, this type of damage that we're experiencing now, although, there's no case on it, obviously. And among the emergency powers that exist under that situation is based upon advice of emergency management officials or upon the advice of licensed professionals retained by the board can determine any portion of the property, condominium property, unavailable for entry or occupancy by owners, family members, tenants, guests, agents, or invitees to protect the health, safety, or welfare of such persons. Again, when this was adopted, it was most likely intended to mean after a hurricane, when you're full of mold or the building was structurally unsound or parts of it were structurally unsound or had mold, you can, prohibit entry. Most of us feel that this statute, although, not perfectly, but it would apply to this situation as well, where you can, in essence, shut down various parts of the community, limit guests, limit things like that. Now, again, we're not a police state, so it might be difficult somewhat to enforce. But so I don't think you should be having any gatherings. Definitely not allowing people to have private parties or things like that. Close the fitness center. I would, quite frankly, close the clubhouse right now.
Right.
I would try to limit, the ability for people to congregate. I also think it's, quite frankly, prudent to limit guests coming into the building unless it's,
right.
A caretaker, a caregiver, medical, needs, things like that. I have no issue with that, and I think associations should be doing that.
Well, one of the things I would say is, and Peter, I want you to give me your phone number here in a second, but one of the things I would say is that look at your documents too. I had an association that had old documents that actually prohibited this kind of action, even in an emergency. So,
well, that's what the statute does say, unless prohibited by your documents.
Right. So what you need to do is give Peter a call if you need some help. Peter, give me your number and where they can reach you.
561-241-4462.
Okay, 241-4462, area code 561. So give Peter a call, and we'll be back again next Monday, God willing, right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's lasting station, hopefully without the coronavirus.